All right, guys, well, welcome to the How Do You Health podcast. We are live in studio. We with Barton Scott, our my good friend Barton Scott. We were. I was telling you that we were at Solar Punk Summit this past weekend.
Mhm.
Got to meet incredible people and pulled out my podcasting. So I had like 4 or 5 like quick quick fire interviews. So can't wait to release some of that. Wish you would have been there. There's lots of great people, and you would have been right in that crowd as well too. But Barton, let's do a reintroduction because we did shoot a podcast with you once before, and this is going to be like a better quality audio on it, and then also continuing the conversation because you've learned so much about your company and what you're doing and on all the testing. So yeah, give yourself a quick intro.
Yeah. So for anyone watching, if you've ever had memory loss, then we have a similar story. If you've ever had you probably wouldn't call it the extreme version like this, like I had, like memory loss. But this, the whole reason why we're here today is because about 8 years ago, I really started to lose my short-term memory. And I went on just a rampage to figure out what I could test for and what I could change because I was in my mid-20s then, and I was fit, but I was not healthy. And initially I felt like I had no room to complain because when you're one of the fittest among your friends, people look at you and they go like, you're in your mid-20s, you made it through college, congratulations, you're healthy, like stop complaining.
Yeah.
Is this kind of like the thought, and yet not acknowledging that you have things to correct. I say that also for people because it's also something as you're listening to this to think like, is that me too?
Yeah.
Right? Because so this is permission. I'm offering permission to really think about your own health and not be scared to look at it, because now we'll get through how here in a moment, but now there's a way that I've developed using my background in chemical engineering and my understanding in nutrition to really solve a lot of this, to reverse a lot of these deficiencies that make our health not so great, that make our quality of life not so great. So really, I mean, my my whole brand is about living life to the fullest and having the health to do that. So optimizing everything so that you can work a full Friday and then also go enjoy dancing and just absolutely raving with your friends.
Yeah.
And
Having a
then
blast.
yeah, have a blast. And that doesn't mean you get super drunk or anything, but just having the energy, the ability to make energy at a cellular level so that you can perform, whether that is cognitively in a board meeting or making, just whatever it is that you want to get done during the day for work that's super cognitively demanding, making tough decisions, hiring people, firing, deal making, whatever it takes. And then also enjoy just all the fruits of your labor, right? Because what is it worth if we can't enjoy it, right? So I think it's really both. So it's an approach to longevity, it's an approach to functionality. What I realized is I and everyone else do not absorb minerals very well. And minerals, not vitamins, but minerals specifically, that whole periodic table of elements, are what make us up, and they are the hardest things to absorb in the body, and they're the most important. They activate all the enzymatic pathways in the body. So I started to think, wow, okay, this is going to be a key. If it matters in my mid-20s, then it's going to matter for the rest of my life. It's going to matter.
More so, yeah.
Yeah, more so. Continually more so. So I started to think about, and then I later became a nutritionist a couple of years after that as I was figuring some things out. And, I realized like most of my patients were 40s and up. And I was thinking, wow, they have all these compounding issues because they're not detoxing well at a cellular level. They're not able to clear those toxins, get rid of that cadmium, mercury, lead, arsenic, so on.
Yeah.
So the solution for me, the lens that I had that was pretty unique was I understood how to confidently take an industrial process and improve on it. And I just needed to find the right relationship that would allow co-investment of that, so that we could put out a product with a proprietary process and produce minerals of a size and stability that would get into your cell. So what that means is, imagine your cell is the size of a basketball or a basketball hoop, and you're trying to put a Mack truck through that basketball hoop. It's like that's never going to work, and that was the problem that I saw when I was taking a lot of supplements, a lot of good brands and things. So I realized, okay, so first I need a test to figure out what I'm missing and what I have too much of, because it's not about just being too low in something. You can have too much calcium, and that can make you inflexible.
I mean, well, that's how you get clogged arteries,
right,
as well, right? It's too much calcium buildup.
Yep. So you think about, well, what antagonizes calcium? Like, what chemically can I do to buffer against that besides reducing in my diet? But you can also have low calcium, and you can have signs and symptoms of high calcium. So I needed a test that I could rely on that was actionable. So we found that. We offer that today at our site at upgradeformulas.com, and we pair that with a consultation with a nutritionist that I've trained personally in this test. So they have to be a certified nutritionist. They also have to have a deep understanding of the test. And they give people, a roadmap, both through diet tweaks and supplements, to really measurably change the trajectory they're on. And that's what I needed. My my memory was just not what it was in college for a couple years after, and it was shocking because I just had a great rote memory, so it was pretty black and white when it dropped off.
What'd you study in college?
I studied chemical engineering in school.
Okay, yeah. So you already had a little bit of a knowledge of what to even look for, right? Because
sure. So in terms of my own health, you mean?
Yeah, well, just sometimes you don't even know where to look.
Sure.
Right, like you kind of. Well, I mean, you even said you started by figuring out that, well, the size of these molecules is never, like, no one would even think it. Most people wouldn't even think, like, well, of course it goes in there. If I eat it, it's gonna go in there. But but no, it's not.
Right.
That's not exactly how it works, right? Yeah, and then that's not even including if you have gut issues or if you have autoimmune disorders. And it's crazy how many. I mean, we're working at the clinic. There's so many different things that happen, right? So it's just like, I love the testing aspect, right? And so because and then you do hair tests. Mm-hmm. Can you explain why hair testing?
Yeah, sure. So we do hair testing because, blood has been the standard that everyone's been trained on. I get that. But, blood is quite literally us on our best behavior. Now, I'll explain that. But imagine this current that's going through your whole body, and know that blood has to be about 7.36 pH, and if it's not, you die, like, almost instantly. Also, if you don't have the right nutrients, if you don't have enough magnesium, sodium, or potassium, your heart you're done, like in a fraction of a second. So, the blood has to be very, very rich. For that reason, it's one of the worst places to pull from, I found, in part because it varies throughout the day, especially depending on what you're measuring, whether it's cortisol, insulin, etc. There's ways to sample it multi-times during the day. I get that. And we can't test everything in hair yet either. So do I still test some things with blood? I absolutely do. But also, a lot of people, whether they want to admit it or not, whether they've ever even thought about it or not, are afraid of needles, and they will not go to their doctor very often. And I mean everything from young people to old people of every gender, So
well, we find the people that are tatted are the ones that are most scared of needles, which is like, really?
Yeah. I have a lot of friends that tell me the same thing. They're like, "Oh yeah, I love this. I hate." Yeah,
I was like, it's a poke for like half a second.
I know, man.
As opposed to like an hour, 2-3 hours of.
Yeah.
Hey, to each its own, right?
Exactly. But, when you give people a solution that they'll actually use and they can do in the comfort of their home, they can do it whenever they get a haircut. You can take that inch of hair closest to the scalp and send it into us. You get I mean, we sample 63 different pieces of data from that one test that's roughly $100.
Yeah.
And then another consultation on top of that gives you just dozens of insights.
So hair?
It's so valuable.
Let me ask you this:
Yeah.
is hair kind of like in geology, where you go look at rock formations and like there's so much history there,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because is that somewhat accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much. So you get an average, right? So you get a you're kind of referring to like layers of like sedimentary rock, and things like that, which is super interesting. Yeah, geology is so fascinating. Spent some time learning about that in school, but the with hair, what we're seeing is a 6 to 8 week window of nutrients, right? So we're seeing an average. So we're seeing a huge sample size. So when we actually deliver a value, that ultimately you have to put a value on the test. So you say, all right, your sodium to potassium ratio is a 2.5 if you're lucky. That's ideal. And that represents the overall vitality in your body. Okay, so whether it's that or any other nutrient that we're testing, we get this huge sample size. So we're actually we're taking a much larger thing and cutting a sample of it and taking it. So we per nutrient we get about 1,000 times more data than if we had sampled that nutrient in blood. And it's look at CSI. They're always looking at hair on the crime scene. It remains for a while. It's just more sturdy. The other thing people are familiar with is drug testing, which we don't do. We don't care if you smoke marijuana. It's not what the test is about. This is all private data, and you don't have to worry about anything. But
but going back to, you said like the blood is almost like us in a how'd you say it? Us in a
our best behavior.
Behavior.
Yeah.
But that's also because the body's very resourceful,
mm-hmm.
and it'll make some of these minerals if it has to. Right? Is that correct?
Right. So what the body does, and I'm glad you went back to that for people, because this is key to understand. What I meant by that is the body will leach from bone marrow. It will leach from bone marrow, right? So people end up with osteopenia, osteoporosis at the end of their life. Sometimes that's because of heavy metals like cadmium that settle into the bones and then become brittle later, because that heavy metal looks a lot like calcium chemically. In the body, and so you get and it's part of the reason why it's harder and harder to detox as you age. So if you're listening to this, start working on a mineral balancing and heavy metal detox program now, because no matter what age you are, your ability to get rid of those things later gets harder, just as entropy increases, as your cellular efficiency reduces. But this also, at the same token, is a way to increase that. And so really the only way I know systematically as a whole to increase that.
Well, you would imagine that having to, like you said, leach minerals or anything out of bone takes a lot of energy, a lot of work for the body to do that. It'll do that because it has to, but as you get older, that energy is less and less. So then it just becomes easier or harder to extract, and then you're even more deficient. Right? So the idea is like supplementation, which is the way that we talked about supplementation all the time. Is just giving your body the resources so it doesn't have to work as hard, because there's people that tell us all the time, like, yeah, but your body will make it anyways. It's like, well, yeah, because there's resources, but if you're lacking the resources,
you flat out can't. Yeah, exactly. So your body will make like ketones from stored body fat, which is amazing, but elementally, the body can't make magnesium. It can't make chromium. It can't make iodine. So what we see is these deficiencies passed from mother to daughter, or mother to son, or toxicities. So let's say mom had a lot of cadmium from cigarette smoke or tobacco or nicotine or even a lot of coffee. And this is something I'd love to touch on here in a sec.
Please, because I love coffee.
Yeah.
I drink too much coffee.
Yeah. So we'll talk about addiction here in one moment on that. But just like broad range why addiction happens, not just with coffee, but with anything. Actually, let's go to that right now. I'll come back to this. So something that I've only shared a couple times that is, I think, so fascinating is if we just take the example of copper in the body. So copper is something your thyroid needs, but if you have too much of it, then it's toxic. And that's the case for a lot of things in the body, it turns out. So it's all about balances and ratios. So it's not about only measuring the individual elements, which we do with that test that you mentioned, but it's also what is this in relationship to zinc and magnesium and manganese and chromium.
Like
and
you
so
mean
forth.
from a balance standpoint.
Yeah, from a balance.
Yeah.
So you're like numerator, denominator, dividing one by the other and getting an output. And and we have ranges that we've looked at since 1980s on what is ideal for a healthy population instead of a unhealthy or sick population like the thyroid. When you do thyroid blood work, that's actually based on a sick population. So when they say you're within range and you say back to them, yeah, but I don't feel so great, that's why. So
which is a very common thing.
Yeah,
right?
very, very common thing. People are like, oh, people come to us all the time. They'll talk to one of our nutritionists in a phone call, and they'll say, so everything we do is Zoom or phone call so that people can have access to it wherever. But they'll say, yeah, like I don't know what's wrong. I just want you to know, like I did get blood work done recently, and I was within range across the board, and we go, that's great. But looking at your numbers here, it shows that your thyroid is low because your adrenals are low, for example. So we have insight to both of those. We have insight to blood sugar, metabolism, hormones, through zinc to copper and sodium to potassium. But going back to addiction and thinking about copper specifically, what's really amazing is that some foods that are, we're addicted to them because, for example, copper can stimulate the adrenals and so can cadmium. So you can be in a really tired sort of burnout, like after, and I think we've all been there as adults. If you're like listening to this and you're in your 30s or older, even if you're in your 20s, because you probably most people have been drinking Bang energy drinks since they're like 19 if they're in their 20s now. So like you're in just as bad of a spot. You're like you're chronologically younger, but you might be metabolically worse off than other people live. They're just so detrimental, but that's another topic. Just in general, though, these stimulating things are pretty dangerous to us when we're really tired, because fatigue is a way that reminds our body to slow down so that we can heal. So fatigue is actually pro. It's a positive thing if you think about that. When it says,
if you pay attention to it.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're like, no, I want to keep partying, I want to keep going, then smoking something like sativa that gives you an upper, which I've done, plenty of times, or fill in the blank coffee is another, probably the most common, obviously. Having that second or third cup of coffee or whatever during the day. And this is, look, I love coffee too, but having more than about a cup to get going, I think in the day is pretty tough on the body. And it's easier if you support it through this protocol. It doesn't mean you have to stop. It's actually, if you're going to do some of these things are so hard on the body, like by all means support them. But so check this out. So we're attracted to some of these foods and just consuming this group of things, right? Whether it's say coffee, nicotine, marijuana, tobacco, those all have cadmium in them. And when we have so when we have these foods, right, and we're taking them in, we end up developing quite, like we get a high from it, right? But why do we get the high? What's the addictive mechanism there, right? So I was really curious, and it turns out there's a link between that cadmium if you have copper toxicity, because you've eaten, like I did, I ate cacao, at least, like whether it's nibs or dark chocolate, almost every night for like 5 years as like a snack. I wouldn't eat dessert, but I would have that
chocolate.
Yeah, like high, like 90% or whatever. And I never thought twice about it. It was like, oh, I hear it's good for this and that and this and that.
Yeah,
Just
it's
a
got
long,
antioxidants.
yeah, long list, so you can have 4 pounds of it.
Yeah.
So I would eat like half a bar, like pretty commonly, any night of the week, after dinner. So, and I even noticed I had like a reddish tint in my hair, and still sometimes I still do. I'm still pushing it out years later, but I developed copper toxicity, which, I mean, we see people that have either copper toxicity, so they have a noticeably high level on their test, or they have hidden copper toxicity. So there's 8 other metrics that we look at to see if, although their copper looks within range, it's actually hidden or high. So it's the body's way of, since it is a toxic element after a certain point, holding onto it and sequestering it so that it doesn't. It's almost like a violent movie is on in this, and you don't want your children to see.
Yeah.
So you're like keeping them, hiding their eyes, right? So it sequesters it away in the tissues. So anyway, we look at it through a couple of other metrics. But what's super, super interesting about that is that if that's the case, if you have it for any reason, then when you can be attracted to these high cadmium foods. So and what happens is, and really how addiction happens, how you set yourself up to be prone to addiction to those certain things, is by having this, buildup and not measuring it and not doing anything about it. So knowing that, I can take vitamin C, I can take zinc, I can take iron, but I need to know my levels. I need to know how much of these things to take. So we discuss that with people, and it really, really helps because it helps balance hormones. So then now your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your husband, your wife, your mom, your dad, whoever it is, that flies off the handle. Now because they have too much, or their follow through is low, or they're not decisive. Like all of these things are copper and zinc, and they have these traits to them that are very masculine and very feminine. Copper as an element is very feminine. You want a little bit of it because it's creative. It's a creative element. So if you have none, if you have an excess of zinc, you'll be overly analytical. You'll be the classic like guy that is a analyst for the CIA or something. You'll be, or like a, some like who do you want to have that? Like maybe your bookkeeper. They'll be like very analytical, but like very low creativity. Low adaptability, low ability to connect with others, so empathy, things like that, because copper goes up and down with estrogen in the body. So it really, really is a sign and symptom. Zinc, more clarity, more. It's just like a good masculine sort of thing. Heavy metals, some heavy metals have this sort of trait too, and you notice it because you see personality types in talking to people. You can also guarantee that when someone's below a certain ratio of, say, sodium to potassium, they will have what will seem like a bipolar disorder. And the same is true with high copper. So, and you go, wow, she was not always like this.
That's nuts. Yeah.
That's so crazy. And now I no one can really be around her, and you can't, like, it's just personality change. Like, what happened? And she like eats so well, like I don't get what's going on, and it could be something like that. So it's super interesting. I mean, below a certain point, you can guarantee someone will have emotional disturbance if they're like, say, a 1.2 or lower on a certain ratio in the body that we test for. So so that's interesting. Really, to wrap that previous point up, it's addictive because in the case of those substances that I mentioned, we're taking in cadmium and we're pushing out that copper toxicity temporarily. So while that's happening, we get this euphoria effect because our body feels less toxic because it's shuttled it into our tissues and out of our blood.
Interesting. And then that's cool. Well, because then that feeling, you just want more of it, right? But,
and then the high dies off, yeah.
Correct. And is there a chemical release there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's like dopamine, serotonin, things that are happening right there, but it ultimately comes down to the elements and what's present and what's not, and what's able to activate enzymatic pathways. So what happens is cadmium comes in and it blocks those enzymatic pathways. Copper tries to dock and it can't, so it gets shuttled out or recycled in the blood and then pushed into tissues where it's stored, whether it's hair and we measure it, or skin, or anything else. So yeah.
So then does toxicity also come from, like, let's say products that people put on their skin and all that? Is that?
Yeah, definitely. We should, we don't absorb everything through the skin as well, and that's probably a really good thing, because some of the things that some of us put on our skin is just like, it's crazy, and I used to be in that boat too, but it's been a long, long time since I didn't look at what I put on my skin, and it's just, you have to think of it as your skin. I'm sure everyone listening to this at this point is like, yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
You should treat it as food. You should, yeah.
You should treat it as food. Let me ask you this. This is totally random.
Yeah.
Totally random, and I just want to ask it.
Sure.
And you might not even have
Sure.
any clue on it, but because we're talking about absorbing stuff, if you're, you could always just drink the water, but if you're like dying of thirst and you're like about to fucking die because you just haven't had any water,
should you drink your urine?
No, can you, let's say for example, someone had your mouth taped, and you can't drink the water. Could you shower in it and get hydrated?
Not enough to save your life.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've always wondered that, right? Because I've always wondered. I don't know why I've wondered that, but it's just one of those things that, like, will your body just become like, this is the only way I can take it. Will I do it? Will I adapt to that? Right.
Right.
Adaptability.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. We're not even high yet.
Yeah, I know. Right? That's funny. Hey, well, we've been trying this thing lately, and we're gonna continue to try it. Let's take a second real quick to talk about some of your supplements here, and give them a little
a little background on these.
Yeah, a little background.
So this first one you handed me, for anyone watching on video, is upgraded magnesium, and this has changed a lot of people's lives around the world. We sell this in every country now, and I mean all the products, but this one in particular has helped a lot of people sleep better, and if they struggle with anxiety, it knocks that out really quickly. So what I say for most people is take 2 at least, but maybe 3. You need a lot less milligrams per dose with all of our products, because you absorb them so well, because again, that particle size is a thing, and the stability of it is a thing. Being able to get into the cells without being digested. Granted, you have to digest the capsule, but anyone has enough stomach acid to do that. It's just about breaking down the minerals. So we put them in that kind of, you could think of as a digested form, a digestion-ready form. But magnesium is a precursor to melatonin.
Yep.
So, and it's also essential for making ATP. So when you have those, you look at magnesium, oxygen, for example, you need those to make ATP, or energy in the cell. And why is that important? Well, if your cells if they don't have enough of that raw material, then they're not open for business that day. Like, period. Full stop. There's no substitutes. Like, that's why it's so critical, and it's why people feel like they come back to life and they both simultaneously have more energy but are more relaxed as well.
And is magnesium one of those, I was going to say ingredients, but minerals that a large percentage of people are deficient in? Yeah,
certainly. So studies estimate 80% or so, and I think that's right. I would say it's at least that, and from what we see in testing. So yeah, I mean, it's so crazy, and we've been sort of lied to as a whole on forms. Like, certain forms are better than others on the whole if you're using a traditional absorption technology. But when you start looking at the world of nanotechnology and particles, if you can get something into a cell-ready formula, then it's going to just work a lot better.
Efficient.
So ours is magnesium, just true magnesium, and I stabilize it in a very unique way with chloride.
Nice.
That's unique to us. The body also needs that. So, yeah.
And I'm sure we can have a discount code or something like that for them.
Yeah, sure.
How do you health? Let's do it. Let's make it How Do You Health.
Yeah, sure. How Do You Health at checkout. For, let's say, 10% off on anything that you guys want. And happy to do that
Hell
for
yeah.
sure.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
this has been the biggest like paradigm shift for me in my entire life and in my health. I don't know where I'd be without the test and a really good consultation. I got lucky, and like that guy's retired now, but he was such a savant in this area. I learned so much from him. So,
That's fantastic.
yeah, just kind of bringing that, living that work forward.
So what types of foods are? I mean, people always ask us that too.
Mhm.
Like, what should I be
Yeah.
eating to get more magnesium? Right? Like, what are the big
Yeah.
ones? And again,
Yeah.
I'll have the caveat
Yeah,
that like
sure.
I think that you should always supplement, right? Because
Sure.
it's the cleanest. You don't have to worry about like if that came from a good source, or I mean, not
Mhm.
not you should, but I'm talking about like your foods. Like if you go
Foods.
out to eat, it's like, well, they said I should eat a bunch of salmon. It's like, well, yeah, but you don't know where
Right.
they got the salmon from, like and all that. So there's so much to have to take into now and
Yeah.
consider
Mhm.
that supplementation makes it a little bit easier,
Mhm.
especially for something like a mineral that can, So,
Mhm.
but other than that, like what kind of foods would be great?
Yeah, so I'll hit you guys with a couple of facts real quick. So since 1940, this is the most conservative estimate that I've heard. 40% less nutrients in the food that you eat since 1940 in 80 years. So, that is and no one's out there eating 40% more. And
Well,
I mean, some people are. Some people are.
yeah,
Another thought on addiction for people that because I really haven't heard people really put this together well. Very simply, a lot of people eat more food than they should because they're trying to get the nutrients from the food, and the food doesn't have enough, so they continually go for it.
well, I've explained this to someone else before. It's like, well, you're still hungry because you still haven't fulfilled the deficiency that your
Mhm.
body's trying to replenish.
Exactly.
And you keep eating the same thing, it still doesn't have that, right?
Yeah.
So either supplement or change what you're eating. But
Yeah.
then if you change what you're eating, you're going to have different deficiencies, right? Like
Mhm.
that's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah.
What we talk about all the time is soil, right? And
Mhm.
how I think that the big mission in our lifetime should be to
Soil.
regenerate soil
Yes.
because of that, right? Because like that's where you should be getting your nutrients from your food.
Yeah, ideally,
Should.
should. The atmosphere is roughly 1,000 times more toxic and now than any other time in recorded history. So your body has to detox those, those particles you're breathing. So a lot of people that we see they test high in aluminum, which eventually leads to Alzheimer's if it's not removed from the body, if it really builds up. So yeah, you have these toxins. You have brake dusts. You're in a big city and you're like, oh, the city's beautiful, but you're sitting in traffic, breathing in hexane and just all the things us chemical engineers have put out there that simultaneously make life better and worse.
Yeah.
Whether it's just like the formaldehyde or like all the VOCs of volatile organic compounds. So your body has to detox all these things, and your body does a better job of that when you have the right minerals, like providing protection against heavy metals. Is how you can think of it. So heavy metals electrostatically don't stick in the body the same way when you have these minerals of positive and negative charge in the right binding sites. So you can think of it as like almost like they're paired off as mates already, and and they've like mated for life type thing. As long as they're there, they're preferential. That's the preferential binding order. So it's like improving that preferential binding order even from the time a child is born. So a child may come out and be crying, for no reason that's apparent, and it's because they have toxicity that was passed on from the mother, and they have that toxicity in part because the mother had low iodine levels, and that means the child's going to have, on average, about a 20-point lower IQ because she was completely devoid of iodine. So that's
pretty
huge.
significant.
That's
yeah.
significant. That's the difference between that kid grows up and barely makes it through college and that kid excels and is an innovator that the world depends on. Like that could be the difference in like a.
So then it's compounded by the environment too, right? If you
That's
grow up
huge.
into like a society or to a neighborhood that also doesn't
Clean water.
Yeah, correct, right? I mean, we have clean water is a huge problem. I mean, what problem isn't huge at this point anymore, right? Because it's been compounded and ignored for so long, and now it's like, yeah, people always say like, well, you can't do anything right anymore. It's like, in a sense, right? Because it's hard to get it from what's already out there because it's been ignored.
Mm-hmm.
But the cool thing is that because of technology
Mm-hmm.
and people that are doing the research,
Yeah.
unfortunately, sometimes we're not the loudest people.
Yeah, what do we need to do? We'll put on the gorilla suit. We'll jump up and down. I'm all for it. But you have to spend your time somewhere, and it's usually
Yeah.
it's usually. I think it's going to be breaking this down more and more to like manageable sound bites for people that they can
Yeah.
repeat to other people. So like one of the sound bites is the one I just gave you about the soil, like 40% less deficient. Another is if you like every disease out there is somehow related, at least in part, to magnesium deficiency, and all diseases would not exist if you had no mineral deficiency. Which is amazing, but you think about that and you go, well, why do we have disease from a systematic level? Well, you have disease because a cell in any organ couldn't work as intended, period, full stop. That is just the physics, the chemistry, the math equation of that cell. So when you A, give that cell what it needs to operate, and B, so if it's like a business, think of it as a business. You give the business enough cash to do the marketing functions and work as it should, and then the business or the cell in this case, heavy metals, are not overrunning it and stopping the function, just like having like bad employees that are stealing from the company essentially, or somehow like being wasteful in the company's operations. Then when you eliminate one and fix the other, suddenly you get proper functioning, and everything in that neighborhood or in that cell's vicinity operates well. So think cell and think kidney or think organ or think, it doesn't matter, any part of the body.
Well, I know. I was reading this book called Mitochondria: The Future of Medicine, something like that. And it talks about how a very well-functioning cell can influence its cells around it and maybe even give some of its power away.
Yeah.
The problem is that we get to the point where like it's a cluster
Mm-hmm.
of cells that are inefficient for one reason or the other. So it's hard to make that up. But whenever you're doing the right things, like it doesn't matter if a few cells are malfunctioning because they'll help each other out, right? So it's almost like you have a community. And if you have one bad neighbor, it's like it's fine because everyone else will come in and help out and make up the difference and maybe even influence that neighbor eventually to be like, dude, you gotta like be a part of this. Like this is great. But if it's the majority or a big chunk of it, then it's harder because now they also have a little bit of a, well, no, let's stick together and be evil or whatever. Not evil, but I hate that.
Low performing.
Low performing.
Yeah.
And so. Because then it's interesting, right? Because it's like the opposite of kryptonite. Like you want to give your cells what they need, to properly function, and that's what we are: minerals and water and oxygen.
Yeah. So with that understanding, for people listening to this, you have to think, all right, so how much am I spending on supplements or foods and trying to be healthy, and doesn't it make sense to test my levels? To me, given that understanding that we just discussed, testing your levels, I mean, it's I just laugh because it's such a no-brainer. Like it's so fundamental. It's so fundamental.
Well, it's like you gotta know where you're at.
You have to.
If you can't, right? Like if we went back 50 years ago and there was no way to test it, I mean, there's nothing.
Yeah. Be thankful that there's a test now that you can depend on. That
and it's
can
quick.
Show you
ship it over them. You do it. They do it in their home. Ship it right back. Probably comes with
return label.
Return label. Yeah.
If you're in the U.S., it comes with a return label. If you're outside the U.S., it doesn't. But it's very quick and goes to one of our labs, and from there it's just I mean, you get your results in a matter of days, and it's really good. Get a consultation, understand, and make changes, because really, the way I see us innovating, you talked about so many things stacking up, we have to be innovators. We have to give birth to innovators. We have to raise innovators. This is the only way we're going to make progress as a society. And stop thinking that like one person is going to change it all, whether it's a president or one innovator or two innovators. It's not nearly enough. We need to all raise our standard of health and therefore ability to innovate, because the mind is so much sharper when you're operating at peak performance at a cellular level. You take a lot of people, I think you could increase their working memory and their IQ over the next year by doing this protocol. And especially if those were women and they're giving birth to children, breastfeeding, pre, during, post, the whole process is so essential to, again, giving birth to innovators and, being the change that we want to see in the world. So, how do you actually do that? I think this is a great method.
I mean, I applaud what you've been doing, because
Thanks, man.
And it's interesting because we bring in a lot of guests, and it always starts with like, this was my story, and this is now I want to empower people to do the same, right? Because it's like, well, you went through that. You don't want people to continue to go through that.
Yeah, it's a lot of suffering, man.
And that's been the mission. I mean, that's why we created a studio now, right? Because like you said,
too.
it's not me about, it's not, I mean, I can yell all I want, like I said, but the thing is, I'm not going to be loud enough compared to like plenty of other things, right?
Sure.
But that's the idea, right? It's like, who else can we interview? Who else can we talk to? And now we're hosting 4 or 5 different, because we're also a network now, so we have 4 or 5 different podcasts so we'll get you on other ones as well too, because why not?
Yeah.
And but let's start to wrap this up. Like, where can they find you? Where can they reach you?
Sure. But best place, for you can find me on Instagram. You can find at Upgraded Formulas on Instagram, at Barton Scott _ on Instagram. And then, really the website is the best place to get started. And don't go to Instagram hoping you're going to find your solution. Go to the website and find your solution. That's where you'll find it. And yeah, I mean, there's blog articles you can read more too about like what influences gray hair. It turns out zinc and copper ratios, if that's off, that's an option. That's a fairly recent article I wrote. Yeah, just different things. So I think that's a good place. Hop on the email list if nothing else. And yeah.
And the website again is?
Oh yeah, website again is Upgraded Formulas, upgraded with an ED and formulas with an S. So upgradedformulas.com. And the code, we want to make it How Do You Health?
How Do You Health?
Cool.
It'll be for 10% off. And thank you guys so much.
Yeah.